The wind bit John Hatcher's exposed skin, 1,000 tiny needles of ice in the biting late autumn air. Below him, the valley floor was already blanketed in the first serious snow of the season. A stark white canvas stretched across the jagged peaks of the northern Rockies. He pulled the collar of his worn field jacket higher. The movement was a familiar, unconscious ritual. For 3 years, this self-imposed exile had been his only sanctuary, a frozen shield against the specters that hunted him from within. Every night, the nightmares came. Not the typical soldier's nightmares of explosions and gunfire, but something far worse. They were vivid, visceral replays of the creatures he had once hunted, the cryptids that had plagued the forgotten corners of the world, the ones his unit had been formed to erase. He saw horrors that would break most men, but the faces of the friends he lost truly haunted him, spectral wounds that never healed. He lost more than comrades on that final mission. He lost a part of himself, a piece of his soul that the wilderness had failed to reclaim. His cabin, a crude affair of hewn logs and salvaged metal, was tucked into a high, secluded ravine, miles from the nearest paved road. He lived a sparse existence, chopping wood, hunting the lean game of the mountains, and always trying to outrun the silence in his own head. He had perfected the art of survival, but he was still a captive of his past. The satellite phone, a relic he had decommissioned years ago, shattered the brittle piece of his isolation. It was an old, encrypted model, one he had not touched since his last assignment. The screen glowed, a cold blue beacon in the dim cabin. He stared at it for a long moment, the dread a bitter taste on his tongue, before his ingrained discipline took over. He picked it up. "Hatcher," a voice crackled through the ancient speaker, devoid of warmth, devoid of empathy. It was General Alistair Vance, his former handler, a man whose face was etched with the same kind of cold, calculating pragmatism John remembered. "We need you back. Now." John said nothing, just listened to the low hum of the connection. He already felt the familiar tightening in his gut, the grim anticipation of a burden he had shed. Vance had always been good at making ultimatums sound like opportunities. "Yellowstone National Park," Vance continued, ignoring John's silence. "Several teams have gone dark. Highly skilled operatives. Hatcher, zero trace. All evidence pointed to a single alpha target. Something unusual beyond anything they had encountered. It was a werewolf Hatcher, but not like the folklore. Smarter, more brutal. The kind of thing your program was designed for." John's jaw tightened. A werewolf. The words scraped against the raw edges of his memory. His program, once an obscure, covert operations entity within the clandestine agencies, had been dedicated to eradicating these unexplained threats, securing the world from the creatures that haunted the shadows of human myth. He thought they were done. "We need you to neutralize it." Vance's voice was clipped, final. "Coordinates will be sent. You leave immediately." "My terms," John rasped, his voice rough from disuse. He was a fool for even answering, but the old instincts were hard to kill. "I work alone. My equipment, my intelligence, no backup." "Your terms are irrelevant, Hatcher," Vance countered, a chilling edge to his voice. "This is not a negotiation. It is an order. Your file is still active. Your security clearance, too. Consider this your final mission, a chance to clean up the mess left by other projects." The implied threat hung heavy in the air. John knew what Vance meant. His past, his service, the things he had done for them, they owned him. He was a tool, not a man. The bitterness of it was a familiar friend. "Coordinates received," John said, already moving. He packed quickly, his movements efficient, practiced. The small cabin, once his haven, now felt like a cage. The drive to Yellowstone was a descent into a desolate landscape. Late autumn had painted the pine forests in muted greens and dark browns, the sky a perpetual canvas of bruised grays. Each mile deepened the sense of isolation, of entering a forgotten, hostile world. The winding roads, slick with melting snow, led him not to a national park, but to the very edge of oblivion. He passed no other vehicles, saw no signs of human life. The silence outside the truck was absolute, broken only by the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. At the coordinates, he found nothing but an empty, snow-dusted clearing. No signs of the vanished teams, no wreckage, no clues. Just the crushing silence of the forest, the tall, dark pines standing like silent, imposing sentinels. He parked his truck far off the main track, burying it beneath a camouflage tarp. His equipment was minimal, but it was advanced, specialized. A compact assault rifle, a pump-action shotgun, a tactical knife, its blade honed to a razor's edge. Night vision goggles, a small communication radio for one-way communication from his handlers. He checked each item with meticulous care. The soldier's discipline kicked in, overriding the despair. The weight of the gear felt familiar, a grim comfort. This was not a kit for success. It was a kit for survival, for a fight already lost. It reeked of a suicide mission, but his orders were clear. He set up his camp in a dense stand of firs far from the clearing. A single, low-profile tent, almost invisible amidst the undergrowth. He worked silently, efficiently, every movement calculated to leave no trace. The silence was unsettling, amplified by the vastness of the wilderness. It was not the peaceful quiet of nature. It was a pregnant, watchful silence, the kind that preceded a storm. All day, he moved through the forest, a phantom in the gathering gloom, searching. He found the first signs just before dusk. Trees unnaturally snapped, thick trunks twisted as if by a giant's hand. Deep gouges, claw marks, raked across the stone faces of boulders. And then, the remains. Small animals, deer, rabbits, a coyote, torn apart with a precision that went beyond typical predators. Their bodies were scattered, disemboweled, but not eaten whole. It was a hunt for sport, a ritualistic pursuit of something else entirely. He ran a gloved hand over the torn flesh of a young buck, his mind racing through the old protocols. This was not a bear, not a wolf. This was something different, something with a cruel, intelligent design. The smell of blood, metallic and cloying, hung heavy in the cold air. It was not just fear that settled in his bones. It was a deep, primal dread. The hunt was on. As twilight deepened, the forest held its breath. John Hatcher felt it, a cold, unnatural presence settling over the landscape like a shroud. Every rustle of dry leaves, every distant snap of a twig, sent a jolt of raw adrenaline through his veins. His veteran instincts, honed through years of combat against the unseen, screamed at him. Predator. Close. His breath hitched, shallow and rapid, as he moved through the dense undergrowth towards the clearing he had chosen as a potential battleground. He checked his shotgun, cycling a heavy slug into the chamber with a precise clack. His tactical knife, secured in a sheath on his chest rig, felt like an extension of his arm. The night vision goggles mounted on his helmet were flipped up for now, saving their battery for the moment of truth. He moved with the quiet grace of a phantom, melting into the shadows, a hunter becoming the hunted. The first signs of the creature were not visual but visceral. Shadows between the trees moved too fast, too deliberately, defying the logic of wind and moonlight. A low growl, a rumble that vibrated through the earth itself, echoed through the forest, a sound unlike any known animal. It was not just a predator's snarl. It was a challenge, a promise of violence. The suspense thickened, pressing down on him, almost suffocating in its intensity. He tasted the fear, sharp and metallic, on the back of his tongue. Then it emerged, not from a specific direction, but from the darkness itself, a manifestation of the nightmares that had plagued him for years. Its immense, muscled form was covered in thick, matted fur, dark as the deepest shadows. Its eyes, twin points of glowing crimson, burned with an ancient primal fury, a hunger that devoured the very air. Long curved claws, sharp as razors, extended from its powerful paws, and its maw lined with rows of glistening dagger-like fangs, dripped with anticipation. This was no mere beast. This was the embodiment of terror, a creature of malevolent predatory intelligence. John did not hesitate. Instinct took over, overriding the paralyzing fear. He raised the shotgun, the heavy weapon feeling light in his hands, and fired. The roar of the blast ripped through the silence, followed by the sickening thud of the slug impacting the creature's chest. It roared, a sound of agony and rage, and lunged. The ensuing battle was a whirlwind of motion, a brutal dance on the knife edge of survival. John moved with a practiced fluidity, a lifetime of training guiding his every parry and strike. He was fast, agile, his mind calculating angles, searching for weaknesses. He fired again, another slug tearing into the creature's shoulder. It stumbled, but recovered with unnatural speed, its momentum unaffected. He dodged a sweeping claw that would have eviscerated him. The wind of its passage stirred his hair. He brought the butt of his shotgun up, smashing it into the creature's jaw. The monster barely flinched, its glowing eyes fixed on him with unwavering malice. This was not just strength. It was an innate resilience, a disregard for injury that surpassed anything he had ever faced. He unloaded the entire shotgun magazine into its chest, aiming for center mass, but the creature absorbed the hits, its roars growing louder, more enraged. He transitioned to his rifle, snapping off bursts of specialized rounds. Each shot was precise, aimed for the head, the neck, any vulnerable point. The creature staggered, blood, dark, viscous, streaming from its wounds, but it kept coming, a relentless engine of destruction. Its speed was terrifying, a blur of fur and claws. It was everywhere at once, a physical manifestation of chaos, yet each of its attacks was chillingly precise, aimed to disable, to kill. He darted under a swinging claw, rolling to the side as a tree trunk splintered where his head had been moments before. He saw an opening, a flicker of hesitation in the beast's movements as it shifted its weight. It was small, almost imperceptible, but John seized it. He dropped the rifle, drawing his tactical knife with a practiced flourish, and lunged. He drove the blade upward, channeling all his remaining strength, aiming for the beast's heart. A desperate, last-ditch effort. He felt the sickening resistance of thick hide, the grinding crunch of bone as the knife sank deep into its chest. A guttural roar tore from the creature's throat, a sound of pure agony that resonated in the very air. But even as John felt the beast's lifeblood gushing onto his hand, Even as he saw the light begin to dim in its malevolent red eyes, the creature retaliated. Its massive claw, thick as John's forearm, shot out in a final, convulsive strike. 3 razor-sharp talons plunged deep into John's chest, ripping through his tactical vest, through muscle and bone, directly into his lungs. A searing, unbearable pain exploded through John's body. He gasped, a wet, rattling sound, his lungs refusing to draw air. Darkness bloomed at the edges of his vision, spreading inward. He watched, through a haze of agony, as the last flicker of malevolence died in the creature's red eyes. It shuddered, then collapsed onto the snow, a massive, unmoving hulk. At the same instant, John felt his own consciousness dim, his body following the beast into the encroaching abyss. He knew, with a certainty that transcended pain, that he was dying. His last coherent thought was of a profound, terrible silence, then nothing. He opened his eyes. He was in his tent. The air inside was cool, the faint scent of canvas and damp earth filling his nostrils. Outside, the night was still upon him, a deep, silent darkness. His first thought, as his mind struggled to make sense of the jarring transition, was that it was a nightmare. A horrific, all too realistic nightmare, triggered by the post-traumatic stress disorder that never truly left him. He pushed himself up, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, the phantom pain in his chest a vivid echo of the beast's final strike. But there was no wound, no blood, just the lingering chill of a terror he could not quite shake. John Hatcher woke with a jolt, the thin sleeping bag tangled around his legs. The air inside his tent was precisely the same cool, crisp temperature it had been when he had first arrived. The familiar low hum of the wind whispered just outside the canvas, a sound he had come to associate with the crushing solitude of his camp. He blinked, pushing down a rising sense of unease. Then the radio crackled. Vance's voice, a familiar grating monotone, delivered the morning report. "Hatcher, this is Command. Environmental scan complete. No anomalies detected. Proceed with mission parameters." John froze. His hand, reaching for his water bottle, stilled. He had heard that exact report before. Yesterday. His mind, usually a fortress of discipline, reeled. A cold dread, far more unsettling than the lingering phantom pain from his dream, began to spread through him. "This is a hallucination," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He pinched the skin on his forearm, hard. The pain was real, sharp. He checked his pulse, steady, if a little elevated. He scanned the tent, his eyes darting from his rifle, leaning against the far wall, to his neatly stacked rations, to the small unlit lantern hanging from the tent pole. Everything was identical to how he had left it before his nightmare. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no evidence of the mortal wound he had received. He scrambled out of his sleeping bag, his movements jerky, driven by a growing desperation. He needed proof, something, anything to tell him this was a new day, a different reality. He checked his watch. The date was the same as yesterday. He checked his small, encrypted datapad. No new messages, no altered logs. He moved through the familiar morning routine, his actions almost robotic. He boiled water over his compact stove, the hiss of the flame and the scent of damp wood smoke filling the small space. He cleaned and rechecked his weapons, each movement a precise, practiced ritual. But with every action, every familiar sound, a horrifying realization solidified in his mind. The water boiled at the same rate. The rifle's action felt the same under his fingers. The small, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand was identical. Every single detail was a precise echo of the day before. What started as mild confusion escalated into a cold, creeping certainty. This was not déjà vu. This was a replay. As evening approached, a perverse compulsion drew John back to the clearing where he had met his end. A part of him, the logical, trained part, screamed against it. It was madness. He hoped against all reason that nothing would happen, that the nightmare would simply vanish like a bad dream. But the dread in his stomach twisted into a knot of inevitability. The wind picked up, howling through the pines, and the air grew thick with that familiar watchful silence. The shadows deepened, lengthening into the grotesque shapes of the trees. He heard the telltale rustle, the low, earth-shaking growl. And then, from the blackness, the creature emerged. Again. Its red eyes burned with the same malevolent fury, its massive form radiating the same terrifying power. It was the same beast in the same place, at the same time. He fought. He tried to change the outcome. He aimed for different spots, tried to anticipate its movements, to outmaneuver it. He fired his shotgun, then his rifle, pouring round after round into the monster, desperately trying to alter the script. But the creature seemed to know his every move, to anticipate his every attack. Its ferocity was absolute. No matter what he did, no matter how he fought, the end was the same. In the climactic moment, he plunged his knife into its heart, the familiar resistance of bone and sinew, the gush of hot blood. And at the exact same instant, the beast's claws tore into his chest, the agony a mirror image of the night before. His consciousness faded, a familiar surrender to the darkness. Mutual death. Again. He woke. Again. The tent. The cool air. The radio. This time the shock was so profound, so devastating, that it sent him scrambling backward, pressing himself against the far wall of the tent, gasping for breath. His mind, struggling to comprehend, finally broke through the layers of denial. This was not a dream. This was real, and it was happening again. The horrifying truth of a closed loop, an endless prison, tightened its icy grip around him, suffocating him with its inevitability. He spent the rest of that day in a state of frantic, desperate experimentation. He took out his tactical knife and carved deep, jagged marks into the trunk of a massive pine tree outside his tent, determined to see if they remained. He wrote detailed notes in his waterproof journal, time-stamping each entry, recounting the events of the day, his growing terror. He tried to alter his route to the clearing, to approach from a completely different direction, to set up an ambush far from the usual spot. The confrontation with the creature still happened. No matter where he went, it found him. The battle unfolded with the same terrifying ferocity, the same brutal dance of death. He killed the monster, and it killed him, in an agonizing, perfectly mirrored sequence. The next morning he woke up. The tree outside his tent was unmarked. His journal was blank, save for the first few entries he had written the very first morning. The path he had taken yesterday was covered in undisturbed snow. He was trapped. He was in a time loop, an inescapable prison of repeating horrors. The initial shock of the loop gave way to a cold, burning resolve. John Hatcher, a man defined by his pragmatism, would not simply surrender. If the loop was his prison, then every cycle was a chance to find the bars, to test the walls. He had died twice already. He was beyond fear of the physical pain. What truly terrified him was the repetition, the psychological toll of a nightmare from which he could never truly wake. He began to approach each cycle with a ruthless, almost insane logic. Morality, caution, even common sense were discarded. He used everything at his disposal. He spent the next cycle rigging the clearing with enough plastic explosive composition 4 to level a small building, burying the charges beneath layers of snow and dead leaves, carefully camouflaging the detonation wires. He planned to detonate them as the creature lunged. When the morning reset, he found the charges gone, the ground undisturbed. He tried pit traps, digging massive, concealed holes armed with sharpened stakes, deep enough to impale an elephant. He lured the creature towards them using bloodied bait. The beast, with a chilling intelligence, either avoided them entirely, sensing the disturbance, or simply leapt over them with impossible agility. John still ended up dying, clawed or torn apart. The traps proved useless. He moved to sniper ambushes, setting up positions a quarter-mile away, using his sniper rifle. He waited, patient as a phantom, for the creature to appear, then unleashed a torrent of fire, aiming for its head, its spine. But the creature always knew. It appeared from a different direction, or moved too fast, or vanished behind cover at the precise moment he squeezed the trigger. Each cycle, he tracked it, stalked it, engaged it, and each cycle, despite his best efforts, the outcome was the same. Mutual, agonizing death. The detailing of each failure was a fresh torment. He used incendiary grenades, tripwires, sonic emitters designed to disorient, even experimented with different types of ammunition, thinking a specific frequency or material was the key. Each attempt was more desperate, more elaborate than the last, yet the outcome was immutable. The creature, with its impossible speed, strength, and resilience, always found a way to kill him. Even when John landed what appeared to be fatal blows, a direct hit to the brain with a sniper round, the creature's chest ripped open by a shotgun slug. It still managed to tear him apart in its death throes, ensuring the cycle continued. It was a nightmare of exquisite, unending futility. The horror of the infinite loop began its slow, insidious work on John's mind. The repeated, agonizing pain of death, the crushing despair of progress always resetting, the complete absence of any escape. He felt bouts of intense claustrophobia, a profound sense of being trapped not just in the forest, but within his own skull. Panic attacks, sharp and sudden, seized him, his breath tearing in his lungs as he replayed 100 deaths in his mind. On the edges of his consciousness, a terrifying thought began to flicker. He was losing his sanity. Despite the daily reset, John felt a profound, bone-deep physical exhaustion. His muscles ached, his joints screamed in phantom pain from countless broken bones, countless torn muscles, countless moments of suffocation. His subconscious, his very body, remembered every wound, every impact, every agonizing breath he had failed to take, even if his conscious mind was reset at the beginning of each day. He tasted the blood, felt the cold sting of his own insides spilling out, heard the tearing of his flesh, all vivid phantom sensations that never truly faded. He was a walking, breathing archive of his own suffering. He tried to impose order on the chaos, to apply his military training to the impossible. He became an obsessive detective. What was the trigger for the loop? What were its rules? He meticulously charted every detail of the forest, every rock, every fallen branch, searching for an anomaly, a clue, a hairline crack in the fabric of his reality. He examined the creature's tracks, its physical dimensions, its reaction times, looking for a pattern, a weakness. But he found nothing but the relentless, unchanging repetition. The forest, the creature, the cycle itself. They were all immutable. The constant stress and the near-total lack of restful sleep began to warp his perceptions. He started experiencing vivid hallucinations, waking nightmares that bled into his daylight hours. He saw the creature lurking at the edge of his vision, its red eyes burning from behind a tree, its silhouette stretching impossibly tall against the fading light. He heard its growl, a low, guttural vibration that emanated from the very ground, even when he knew it was miles away. The image of the beast, its fangs dripping, its claws poised, became a constant companion, a terrifying specter that haunted his every waking moment. A new, chilling paranoia began to take root. He started to feel the creature's presence even during the day, when it had not yet appeared for their nightly confrontation. It was a faint, almost imperceptible feeling, but it grew stronger with each passing cycle. He felt watched. He felt as if the creature knew his every move, anticipated his every thought, predicted his every attempt to break free. It was not just a hunter anymore. It was an observer, a silent, intelligent entity that understood the game they were trapped in. The thought solidified into a terrifying certainty. The beast was not just reacting to him. It was learning. The sheer number of cycles John Hatcher had endured now blurred into an indistinguishable mass of agony and frustration. Dozens, hundreds. He had lost count. The concept of linear time shattered into an endless repeating loop. He was a prisoner in a personal hell, exhausted to his core, yet clinging to the frayed edges of his sanity with a tenacity born of desperation. It was during his countless, meticulous observations that he began to notice it. Subtle changes at first. A slight alteration in the creature's preferred attack vector. A delayed reaction to a feint that had once worked. He dismissed them as anomalies, the result of his own escalating madness. But then they became more pronounced, too consistent to ignore. The creature was actively avoiding the tricks John had successfully deployed in earlier cycles. It was no longer simply reacting. It was adapting. A pit trap that had once snared it, even momentarily, was now seamlessly skirted. The carefully placed sonic emitters, designed to disorient, were ignored, the creature's path shifting just enough to avoid their range. A sniper position John had used repeatedly was now approached with extreme caution, the beast moving through denser cover, its profile minimized. It was becoming faster, its movements more fluid, its strength increased with each passing day. Most terrifyingly, it was becoming smarter, its glowing red eyes no longer just predatory, but calculating. In the culmination of one particularly brutal cycle, John had set a complex series of tripwires linked to explosive charges, a trap he was certain would finally break the beast. He had meticulously planned the engagement, driving the creature into the kill zone. But as the beast lunged, it did not trigger the wires. Instead, it executed a precise, almost graceful leap, vaulting over the entire setup, landing silently behind him. John only had a fraction of a second to register the impossible maneuver before a massive claw tore through his back. In that moment, as his life drained from him, a shocking, unbearable realization slammed into John with the force of a physical blow. The creature was learning. It was absorbing his tactics, remembering his weaknesses, adapting its own strategy. It was not just a beast, not just a cryptid. It was an entity caught in the same temporal trap. It, too, was experiencing the loop. The understanding crashed down on John like a ton of bricks, shattering his remaining illusions. The creature was not just his target. It was his adversary in this infinite, brutal duel. This was not a hunt for extermination. It was a repeated, escalating chess match between two beings caught in the same inescapable nightmare. The horror intensified, layering a new, chilling dimension onto his psychological torment. A strange, silent psychological game began to unfold between them. They both knew. He knew the beast knew, and the beast knew he knew. Each cycle became a test of wills, a desperate attempt to outwit the other. It added an element of intellectual terror to the visceral horror of survival. They were locked in an eternal contest, each trying to find the flaw in the other's logic, the weakness in their resolve, the path to an escape that seemed perpetually out of reach. With this shocking revelation came a new, desperate hypothesis. Every single cycle had ended in mutual death. The loop reset only when both of them died. John reasoned the key to breaking the loop was not just killing the alpha, but surviving himself. He had to emerge from the confrontation not just victorious, but unscathed. This became his new, burning, all-consuming purpose. He had to not only win, but live, truly live without dying, even if the creature died first. His entire tactical approach shifted. He stopped viewing each cycle as merely an opportunity to kill the beast. Now, each cycle became a dedicated study. He studied the creature, observing its every move, its every reaction to various stimuli. He used each day as a research period, analyzing its gait, its preferred attack patterns, its response to pain, its level of intelligence. He was not just looking for weaknesses anymore. He was looking for its own logic, its behavioral patterns within the loop, the rules it implicitly understood. He noted the subtle shifts in its eyes, a flicker of something beyond raw instinct, something that was exhaustion. He was learning its language, and in turn it was learning his. John Hatcher dedicated uncounted cycles to the meticulous creation of his perfect plan. Each day was a blank slate, a chance to refine, to innovate, to push the boundaries of what was possible within the loop's brutal constraints. He experimented with every variable, the precise location of the engagement, the exact timing of his attack, the intricate complexity of his feints and distractions. He became a master of deception, his mind a cold, calculating engine, dissecting every possible outcome, anticipating every counter-move. He scouted relentlessly, discarding dozens of potential battlegrounds before settling on the ideal location. A swampy, partially frozen ravine nestled deep within the pines. Its soft, viscous soil a natural impediment to the creature's prodigious speed. The dense undergrowth and dramatic changes in elevation offered unparalleled cover and maneuverability for John. He spent cycle after cycle preparing the site, digging hidden pitfalls, camouflaging tripwires, and presetting sniper positions with custom-rigged platforms that offered clear lines of fire. His movements were fluid, precise, a testament to the thousands of times he had executed these very actions. His mastery of deception was now absolute. In one cycle, he used recordings of an injured deer to draw the creature into a specific sector. In another, he left a trail of bloodied entrails leading to a false ambush point, then doubled back, circling wide to hit the beast from an unexpected angle. He understood the creature's growing intelligence, its capacity for learning, and used it against itself. He employed a complex combination of false trails, simulated distress calls, and strategically placed scent lures designed to funnel the beast precisely where he wanted it. Every element of his trap was calculated down to the last inch, a symphony of deadly precision. The night of the final assault, the air thrummed with a new, terrifying tension. John lay prone in his sniper nest, the cold metal of his rifle a familiar weight in his hands, his heart a steady, heavy drum against his ribs. He watched as the creature, drawn by his elaborate charade, lumbered into the ravine. It moved with its usual predatory grace, but its glowing red eyes darted around, searching, wary. It was adapting, but John was one step ahead. The creature's heavy paws sank into the soft earth of the bog, its movements instantly hampered. It roared in frustration, struggling to gain purchase. This was his moment. John unleashed a torrent of fire, his custom rifle spitting rounds with devastating accuracy, each one tearing into the beast's struggling form. The creature thrashed, snarling, but its movements were slower, less powerful. John transitioned to his shotgun, leaping from his perch, closing the distance with terrifying speed. He delivered a series of rapid, devastating blows, heavy slugs ripping through its chest, its legs, its head. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and blood. The creature, trapped and wounded, writhed in agony, its roars echoing off the steep sides of the ravine. John, driven by a primal need for victory, plunged his knife into its throat, twisting the blade, severing arteries and windpipe. He felt the beast's immense power drain away, its struggles weakening. He moved with a final desperate burst of speed, rolling away, dodging the creature's last convulsive flailing limbs. He felt a searing pain as a single claw grazed his side, a shallow but bleeding cut, but he barely registered it. He was focused on the beast. He watched as the last spark of life finally, irrevocably, left the creature's malevolent red eyes. It shuddered, then went utterly still, a massive, inert mass of fur and muscle. A wave of profound, almost deafening triumph washed over John. He collapsed onto the muddy ground, gasping, bleeding, but his last conscious thought was pure, unadulterated elation. I won. Finally. He saw the creature's death, witnessed its final breath, and felt his own consciousness fading, not instantly, but moments later as his body gave out from the wounds. He had died, yes, but he had won. The beast had died first. He opened his eyes. It was morning. Again. The cool air in the tent. The low hum of the wind. The precise mechanical voice of Vance on the radio. The wave of euphoria from his victory was instantly replaced by a crushing absolute despair. The loop had not broken. Despite winning the duel, despite ensuring the creature died first, despite his meticulous perfect plan, he was back. His logic, his carefully constructed theory of cause and effect, had utterly collapsed. The horror was not in dying, but in the relentless, inescapable rebirth. The cold despair lasted only a short time before a familiar, almost automatic shift in John Hatcher's mindset took over. He was disappointed, yes, shattered even, but not yet broken. If his perfect plan had failed, then his understanding of the loop was fundamentally flawed. He needed a new schema, a new hypothesis. His initial assumption had been that his own survival, particularly an unblemished one, was the key. He killed the creature and remained untouched. This, he thought, must be the condition. He began a new cycle with this adjusted mindset. He doubled down on evasive maneuvers, focused on disabling the creature rather than simply delivering killing blows, and aimed to incapacitate it completely before finding a way to escape its range. He planned to deliver the final fatal blow from a safe distance, well out of its reach. This time, the creature surprised him. It anticipated his every move with shocking accuracy. John had underestimated not only its capacity for adaptation, but its own fierce, desperate will to survive within the confines of this temporal prison. The beast had learned from John's past cycles, not just his tactics but his fundamental approach. It seemed to have evolved beyond reacting to individual feints. It was now reacting to his intent. The battle was a blur of primal fury and cold, tactical precision, but for the first time the creature held the definitive advantage. John, attempting to create distance, found himself constantly outmaneuvered. The beast predicted his escape routes, cutting him off before he could even fully commit to a dodge. Its attacks were faster, more precise, designed not just to wound, but to incapacitate. John realized with a sickening lurch in his gut that the creature had learned to exploit his predictable patterns, the very habits he had cultivated over years of combat. In a horrifying, disorienting shift, the creature outplayed him completely. It bypassed his defensive stance, swatted his rifle aside with a casual flick of its claw, and delivered a single, devastating blow. Its massive paw tore through his side, crushing ribs, puncturing a lung. John gasped, choked on his own blood, and crumpled to the snow. He felt the familiar, searing pain, the onset of unconsciousness. But this time, it was different. Through a rapidly dimming haze, John saw the creature standing over him. It was wounded, bleeding from several of the shots John had managed to land, but it was alive. It was not convulsing in death throes. It was not collapsing beside him. It was standing. And then, with a chilling, predatory silence, it turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving John alone, bleeding out on the cold ground. This was the first death where only John perished. It was not a mutual kill. It was not a draw. It was a clean, undeniable defeat. The creature had survived, injured but victorious. A cold, animal panic seized John. His heart hammered, not with fear of death, but with absolute mind-numbing horror. The creature had escaped. It had broken the loop. And he, John Hatcher, was now doomed. Doomed to die, truly and irrevocably, with no chance of a reset. Despite the blinding terror, this pivotal moment, this asymmetrical outcome, solidified his mistaken hypothesis. He was convinced, absolutely, that the condition for breaking the loop was indeed his own uninjured survival. Since that had not happened, and the creature had survived, the beast had freed itself. He had failed. He was now condemned to a final, irreversible death. A profound, crushing despair settled over him. After so many days, so many agonizing deaths, so many desperate attempts to break free, he had finally lost. The fight was over. He lay there, staring up at the darkening sky, utterly defeated. He accepted his fate, ready for the final, irreversible disappearance. He felt utterly helpless, utterly beaten. His mind was a maelstrom of bitter thoughts. His enemy had won. He, John Hatcher, the veteran, the one who fought impossible odds, had finally, after an eternity in this nightmare, been defeated. He expected never to wake again. He welcomed it even. This time, it was truly the end. He woke. John Hatcher lay still, his eyes wide, staring at the canvas ceiling of his tent. The same faint light filtered through the fabric. The same low hum of the wind rustled outside. The same familiar detached voice of Vance crackled through the radio. His mind refused to process it, refused to believe it. The shock of awakening after what should have been his final, permanent death was so immense that it shattered his last vestiges of coherence. The raw terror of the previous cycle, the sight of the creature walking away, leaving him to die alone, surged through him, then collided with the impossible reality of his current situation. A profound, all-consuming bewilderment, teetering on the edge of madness, took its place. His previous logic, meticulously constructed over uncounted cycles of pain and repetition, crumbled into dust. Victory had not provided an exit. Killing the creature had not provided an exit. His own death had not provided an exit. Even the creature's survival, leading to his own solo death, had failed to break the cycle. The loop did not depend on the outcome of the fight. It operated according to its own unfathomable, arbitrary rules. All his theories, all his calculations, all his desperate attempts to understand and manipulate the system were meaningless. John felt utterly hollowed out. The purpose of his struggle, the meaning of his grim mission, the very reason for his existence within this temporal prison, had vanished. He was adrift in a sea of futility. All his efforts had been for naught. Every strategy, every sacrifice, every agonizing death had been pointless. He had been pushed to the absolute limit of mental and emotional exhaustion. A man stripped bare of all pretense and purpose. He did not move. He sat in his sleeping bag, staring blankly ahead, refusing to eat or drink. The very thought of action was nauseating. Apathy, profound and chilling, settled over him, bordering on catatonia. He saw no way out. All his knowledge, all his combat experience, painstakingly acquired over years of service and brutally amplified by the hundreds of deaths in the loop, were useless. The system was rigged. He was a hamster on a wheel, doomed to endless, meaningless exertion. Dangerous thoughts, dark and seductive, began to swirl in his mind. He considered stopping. He considered simply ceasing to resist. He could walk out of his tent, unarmed, defenseless, and let the creature tear him apart. It would be a surrender, yes, but a surrender that promised an end to the ceaseless torment. A permanent end. He contemplated simply lying down in the snow, waiting for the definitive death that he now knew would never truly come. The paradox was its own unique torture. He was trapped in a perpetual state of dying, yet could never truly be dead. He stared out the tent flap, his gaze fixed on the repeating world outside. The same trees, the same snow, the same silent, expectant forest. This world, once so familiar, so tangibly real, was now his cage, his personal hell. A perfectly replicated nightmare from which there was no apparent escape. He watched the sunlight trace the same patterns on the snow, felt the same chill in the air, heard the same mechanical whisper of the wind. Each sensory input was a fresh reminder of his imprisonment. Then, in one of those endless, silent hours of despair, as he stared at the frozen landscape, his mind, unburdened by the need to fight, drifted. He involuntarily recalled his past deaths, each one a vivid, visceral memory. He remembered the creature's deaths too, comparing them, replaying the sequence of events. And then a tiny, almost imperceptible thought, a crack in the wall of his despair, surfaced. The solution, he suddenly realized, was not in fighting. It was not in winning. It was not in killing. It was not in the outcome of the battle at all. The problem, the true cause of the loop, lay not in how he participated, but in the very act of participation itself. The loop was not a punishment for failure, but a consequence of their conflict. It fed on their desperate, unending duel. It was the engagement, the mutual intent to kill, that kept the cycle alive. The realization was chilling, yet somehow profoundly logical. The revelation, a fragile seedling of understanding in the barren wasteland of his despair, began to bloom into a radical new perspective. John Hatcher rose from his catatonic state, his movements slow, deliberate. He had been approaching the problem from the wrong angle entirely. The objective was not victory, nor was it the survival of one over the other. The true path, the only logical possibility left, lay in refusing the very nature of the conflict. The loop, he now theorized, was not a mechanism of punishment, but a system of perpetual reaction. It was fed by their mutual aggression, sustained by their mirrored intent to kill. He made a decision, a choice so profound, so antithetical to his years of military training, that it sent a shiver down his spine. John Hatcher, a veteran forged in the crucible of combat, resolved to refuse to fight. He would not draw a weapon. He would not prepare traps. He would not resist. This was not an act of resignation, not a surrender to inevitability, but an act of unprecedented, dangerous faith. It was a leap into the complete unknown, a gamble with his very existence. Methodically, with a renewed sense of purpose, he began to prepare. He emptied his pockets, laying out his spare magazines, his communication unit, his small medical kit. He carefully placed his tactical knife beside his pistol, then laid them both on his rifle, stacking them neatly on his sleeping bag. He stripped off his combat harness, his loaded vest, leaving only his standard field uniform. He would face the creature as a man, not as a soldier. He would face it without the tools of violence. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, urged him to rearm, to prepare for the inevitable fight. But he held firm. His will was a steel rod against his instincts. As evening painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and deep gray, John emerged from his tent. He stood in the gathering gloom, empty-handed, unarmed, radiating no aggression, no threat. The air was cold, sharp, biting, but he barely felt it. Every nerve ending was alive, tingling with anticipation, with a profound, terrifying vulnerability. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, but he forced himself to breathe deeply, evenly. Slowly, deliberately, he began to walk towards the familiar clearing, the site of hundreds of deaths. Each step was a defiance, a silent prayer, a desperate hope for a truth he could not yet fully grasp. He expected the creature to attack, to erupt from the shadows and tear him limb from limb. He was ready for it, willing to accept it, if it meant an end to the cycle. This was an act of absolute terrifying submission, an offering of peace in a world defined by conflict. The forest was unnaturally silent as he walked. There were no rustles, no distant growls, none of the familiar sounds that always preceded the creature's ambush. The suspense grew, thickening the air around him, making each breath a conscious effort. Would the beast recognize his intent? Would it spare a defenseless victim? Was this too just another futile gesture in an endless, meaningless loop? He reached the center of the clearing, the snow undisturbed by the violent battles that had raged there countless times before. He stopped, stood still, and waited. Then it appeared. Not with a roar, not with a furious lunge, not with its usual terrifying speed. It simply emerged from the tree line, moving silently, calmly into the clearing. Its massive form was less threatening in the absence of John's own aggression. Its glowing red eyes fixed on him, but there was no immediate malice, no burning hunger. It simply looked at him, at his empty hands, at his unthreatening posture. In that moment, John saw not just a monster, not just his tormentor, but a being just like him, caught in this absurd, repeating trap. A prisoner, just as he was. They stood there, facing each other, for what felt like an eternity. No words were exchanged. No movements were made. The only sounds were the whispering wind through the pines and the soft thud of John's own heart. In that long, silent standoff, a profound, unspoken understanding passed between them. A shared recognition of their mutual predicament. A silent acknowledgement of the burden of endless deaths and endless rebirths they both carried. For the first time, John felt a connection to the beast, not as an enemy, but as a fellow captive. John Hatcher held the creature's gaze, his own eyes unwavering, attempting to transmit his intent across the chasm of their shared existence. The monstrous form stood before him, its red eyes still burning with an inner light, but devoid of the usual fury. It did not attack. It did not even make a sound. This was more than just an absence of aggression. It was an active, conscious decision not to engage, a mutual, unspoken agreement to a temporary truce. The tension in the air was palpable, yet it was different now. Not the coiled, violent anticipation of battle, but the strained quiet of a profound, impossible understanding. John allowed his gaze to drift, studying the creature with a depth he had never permitted himself before. He saw it not as a mortal enemy, but as an equal, a fellow prisoner in the same inexplicable temporal cage. He noticed details he had never observed in the heat of combat, a subtle tremor in its massive shoulders, a weariness in its glowing eyes that mirrored his own bone-deep exhaustion. There was a raw, vulnerable despair in its stance, a subtle slump that spoke of an endless, unyielding burden. Time stretched, suspended in the chill air, measured only by the rustling of leaves and the steady rhythm of John's own breath. Minutes bled into what felt like hours, punctuated by the absolute silence between the two beings. Then, without a sound, without a growl or a snarl, the creature slowly, deliberately turned. Its massive bulk moved with an eerie silence, its movement smooth as it melted back into the dense shadows of the forest, vanishing as effortlessly as it had appeared. John remained standing in the clearing, stunned. His ingrained instinct screamed at him to run, to arm himself, to seize the moment and strike a blow against the retreating threat. But he suppressed them, a new, fragile clarity overriding the ancient programming. He had not attacked the creature, and the creature, in turn, had not attacked him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt whole, not victorious, not defeated, but simply, irrevocably complete. Slowly, carefully, John turned and walked back to his tent. A profound sense of epiphany mingled with a deep, unsettling disbelief. He had not won. He had not lost. He had simply refused to participate in the brutal, violent game imposed by the loop. He had stepped off the endless treadmill of conflict. The logic of his actions resonated deeply within him. A simple, elegant solution to an impossible problem. A fragile yet intensely vibrant hope began to flicker in his chest. It was a faint spark, but after so much darkness, it felt like a roaring bonfire. Yet, it was a hope riddled with uncertainty. He could not be sure. What if this was just another elaborate trick of the loop, another layer of psychological torment? What if tomorrow morning brought the same chilling déjà vu, the same mechanical radio report, and shattered this nascent hope into a million pieces? The thought was terrifying, an icy hand gripping his heart. John lay down in his sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the forest. This night felt different. It was imbued with a quiet expectation, a profound sense of anticipation, rather than the familiar, soul-crushing despair. He did not know if he would wake at all. This was the true end, the final permanent disappearance he had craved so desperately in earlier cycles. But this time, it was a disappearance tinged with peace, not defeat. He closed his eyes, his mind a quiet, expectant pool. John Hatcher woke. Before his eyes even opened, a profound sense of difference washed over him. The air in the tent, the subtle scent of damp earth and pine, the quality of the light filtering through the canvas. It was unfamiliar, new. Not the precise, repeatable sensation of awaking in a recycled reality, but something entirely refreshingly distinct. He listened. The mechanical, repeating voice of Vance delivering the same drone of environmental reports was absent. Instead, he heard the vibrant, diverse chorus of birdsong. Not the pre-programmed, repetitive chirps he had grown accustomed to in the loop, but a symphony of unique calls, a lively, unrestrained melody. It was the sound of a world unbound, a world filled with the chaotic, beautiful spontaneity of life. He pushed himself up, his movements fluid, unburdened by the phantom pains that had plagued him for so long. He felt a lightheadedness, a dizzying sensation, as if he had just surfaced from a deep, long dive into icy water, returning from a strange, prolonged journey. His body finally was free. The phantom wounds, the aches of 1,000 deaths, were gone. He felt light, unburdened. He pushed aside the tent flap and stepped outside. The world unfolded before him as if seen for the very first time. The leaves on the trees, damp with dew, glistened with an unfamiliar vibrancy. The air itself felt different, crisper, cleaner. The chill a welcome sensation that affirmed his reality. The color of the sky, a vast expanse of clear, brilliant blue, held a depth he had not seen in countless cycles. The sun, a warm, reassuring presence, hung in a position that was definitively not where it had been yesterday, or the day before, or any day within the loop. The world had shifted. He moved through the camp, his eyes searching, confirming. His old notes, the ones he had scribbled in his waterproof journal, painstakingly detailing each cycle, had vanished. The journal was blank. His equipment, the rifle, the shotgun, the knife, they felt different in his hands, not the familiar extensions of his repeated actions, but solid, singular objects. He checked his watch. The date was different. Not just the day, but the month. It had moved forward. These small, undeniable anomalies, these subtle shifts in the fabric of his reality, were the most profound confirmation of his freedom. Finally, he felt true solitude. But this was an entirely different kind of loneliness. It was the vast, expansive solitude of freedom, not the suffocating confinement of a prison. There was no longer the oppressive sensation of being watched, no longer the sinister premonition of an inevitable violent encounter. The air no longer thrummed with the invisible presence of the beast. The dread had lifted. He stood in the clearing, breathing deeply, the cold air filling his lungs with pure, unadulterated relief. He understood it then, with a clarity that resonated through every fiber of his being. The loop was broken, not because he had finally defeated the creature in combat, not because he had managed to survive a brutal encounter. It was broken because he had refused to participate in the game it forced upon them. He had rejected violence as the sole solution, as the only path forward. He had chosen peace, and in doing so had found his own. The fantastic, once a terror, now was inevitable. He was free.